My name is Isabella Edwards, and I'm 38 years old. Have you ever been called a failure by your own parent? Not in private, but in front of 200 people at a grand ballroom? That's exactly what happened to me at my father's retirement dinner. He stood at that podium, looked directly at me, and told everyone I was his biggest disappointment. Not because I'd done something wrong, but because at 38, I was unmarried and childless. My MBA from Wharton? Meaningless. My tech company with 200 employees? A waste of time. But what happened next changed not just that evening, but the entire power dynamic of our family forever. Before I share how one unexpected ally turned everything around, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy stories about standing up for yourself with dignity. I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Drop a comment below. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. It all started 3 weeks ago when I received the invitation. The invitation arrived in a cream-colored envelope, hand-delivered by courier to my office. My father never did anything halfway. The gold-embossed lettering announced his retirement celebration at the Peninsula Hotel's grand ballroom. 200 guests. Black tie mandatory. I called him that afternoon. Congratulations on your retirement, Dad. Isabella, make sure you're there. Front table. It's important. His voice carried that familiar cold edge I'd known since childhood. Of course. Should I prepare anything? A speech, perhaps? No, just be there. Wear something appropriate. The night of the event, I arrived to find the ballroom transformed into a monument to his success. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light over tables dressed in ivory linens. A string quartet played softly in the corner. The guest list read like a Fortune 500 directory. CEOs, board members, venture capitalists. My mother intercepted me near the entrance, her fingers nervously adjusting her pearl necklace. Isabella, darling. She kissed my cheek, then whispered, "Your father has something planned." What do you mean? She glanced toward the head table where my father stood surrounded by admirers. Just be prepared. He's been talking about legacy all week. I found my place card at the main table, right between my younger brother Marcus and my father's seat. The placement felt deliberate, calculated. Marcus was already there, his third whiskey in hand, wearing that smug expression I'd learned to ignore over the years. "Sister," he nodded. "Ready for the show?" "What show?" He just smiled and took another sip. As guests filled the room, that familiar knot formed in my stomach, the same one I'd felt at every family gathering since I'd started my company 5 years ago. Something was coming. I just didn't know what. The evening began with the usual corporate pleasantries. My father worked the room like the seasoned executive he was. 65 years of commanding boardrooms, evident in every handshake. When he introduced our family to his colleagues, a pattern emerged that made my skin prickle. "This is my son Marcus," he'd say, his hand firm on Marcus's shoulder. "The future of Edwards Industries. He's been instrumental in our recent expansions." Marcus would puff up, shaking hands with unearned confidence. The truth? He managed a single regional division that barely broke even. But tonight, he was royalty. "And this is my wife Sarah," my father would continue, "the backbone of our family." Then his eyes would skip over me entirely, moving to the next introduction. When pressed by guests who knew of me, he'd add, "Oh, and Isabella. She runs a small tech startup." Small. The word stung every time. My company employed 200 people across 3 offices. We'd just closed a Series B funding round at a valuation that would make Marcus's division look like a lemonade stand. But to my father, we were small. Mrs. Chen, wife of a prominent investor, cornered me during cocktails. "Isabella, dear, still not married? You're not getting any younger. My daughter Jennifer just had her 3rd baby. She managed to balance everything, VP at Morgan Stanley, and a beautiful family." "That's wonderful for Jennifer," I replied, my smile practiced. "Your father must worry," she continued. "Who will carry on the family name? Marcus is divorced again, isn't he? Interesting how everyone seemed to forget that detail. Marcus, twice divorced with 2 children he saw once a month, was still the golden child. Me? The disappointment who chose spreadsheets over diapers. The dinner bell chimed and we took our seats. My father rose, tapping his champagne glass. The room fell silent. "Before we begin dinner," my father announced, "I want to share what this evening means to me." I forced myself to sit straighter, maintaining the composed exterior I'd perfected in countless board meetings. Inside, frustration simmered. Just last week, I'd signed a contract with a Fortune 500 company that would triple our revenue. My father's response when I'd called to share the news? "That's nice, dear. When will you have time for a personal life now?" He'd never visited my office, not once in 5 years, never asked about our products, our innovations, or the AI technology that had tech journals calling us the next unicorn. But he could recite every detail of Marcus's mediocre quarterly reports. "Family," my father continued from the podium, "is the true measure of success. Money comes and goes, companies rise and fall, but family, legacy, that's eternal." Several guests nodded approvingly. I caught my mother's eye. She looked away quickly. "I built Edwards Industries from nothing," he said, his voice carrying that commanding tone I'd heard my whole life. 40 years of sacrifice, and for what? To pass on not just wealth, but values, the right values. Marcus smirked beside me, already knowing where this was headed. He'd been unusually confident all week, dropping hints about big changes coming. My phone buzzed with a text from my CFO. "Congratulations again on the Morrison deal. You're trending on TechCrunch." The Morrison deal. 6 months of negotiations with Morrison Group, one of the largest private equity firms in the country. We'd closed it yesterday, but I'd kept it quiet, planning to announce Monday. My moment of triumph, overshadowed once again by my father's theater. "Tonight," my father said, his eyes finding mine, "I want to talk about disappointments and victories." The room held its breath. So did I. My father's pause stretched deliberately, letting anticipation build. I knew this tactic. He'd used it in hostile takeovers, making opponents squirm in silence. Now I was the opponent. "Success without succession is failure," he declared. "What good is building an empire if there's no one worthy to inherit it?" The implications hung heavy. If I stayed silent through whatever was coming, the damage would ripple far beyond this room. Several of my employees were here as guests of other executives. My CFO sat 3 tables away with her husband, a Goldman Sachs partner. 2 of my board advisors were somewhere in this crowd. My professional reputation, carefully built over 15 years, could crumble in minutes. The tech world was small and unforgiving. One viral video of me being humiliated by my own father would overshadow every achievement, every innovation, every late-night building something from nothing. "The choices we make define us," my father continued. "Choose career over family. And what do you have? An empty office and a cold bed." Marcus leaned over, whispering, "He's been planning this for weeks. The whole board knows I'm taking over." The board. I scanned the room and spotted them, 5 members of Edwards Industries' board of directors, including William Morrison himself, the chairman and largest shareholder with 40% stake. Morrison sat at a corner table, his expression unreadable as he observed my father's performance. If my father succeeded in humiliating me tonight, in painting me as the family failure, it wouldn't just affect family dinners. It would undermine every business relationship I had. Who would invest in someone whose own father considered them a disappointment? Who would partner with someone publicly deemed unworthy? My mother's hand found mine under the table, squeezing gently. "If you don't stand up now," she whispered, "he'll do this forever." She was right. This was my moment of truth. I know this feeling all too well. When family dismisses your achievements because you don't fit their mold. If you've ever experienced something similar, please share in the comments below. Your stories help others know they're not alone. And if this resonates with you, please hit that like button. It really helps more people find these stories. Now let me tell you what my father said next, because this is where things got really intense. My father's voice filled the ballroom with practiced authority. "I have 2 children," he announced, his gaze sweeping across the crowd before landing on me. "But only one disappointment." The words hit like ice water. Gasps rippled through nearby tables. Someone dropped a fork. It clattered against china in the sudden quiet. "Isabella thinks career matters more than family," he continued, each word deliberate. "She's 38 years old. 38. At her age, I had 2 children and was building a legacy they could inherit. What good is success without a husband?" He asked the room, but his eyes stayed locked on mine. What good is a company without a family to come home to? Marcus straightened beside me, his moment arriving. "While Isabella chases her little startup dreams," my father said, gesturing toward Marcus, "my son has given me 2 beautiful grandchildren. He understands what matters." No mention of Marcus's 2 divorces. No mention of the custody battles or the weekends he skipped with his kids for golf trips. The room didn't need those details. They had their narrative. The successful son who prioritized family and the daughter who selfishly chose ambition. At 38, still alone, my father shook his head theatrically. What a waste of good education. Wharton MBA, top of her class, and for what? To sit in an empty apartment married to her laptop? 200 pairs of eyes turned to me. Some held pity, others judgment, a few barely concealed satisfaction. The women especially, I could see them mentally calculating their own choices, feeling superior in their marriages and children. My phone lit up with another text, this time from a reporter at TechCrunch. "Is that really you at the Edwards retirement dinner, getting destroyed?" Someone was live streaming this. Of course they were. My humiliation would be viral by morning. Through my peripheral vision, I noticed William Morrison hadn't touched his champagne. While others watched my father's performance with rapt attention or uncomfortable fascination, Morrison observed with the calculating gaze of a chess player seeing 10 moves ahead. He pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, then showed the screen to his assistant. She nodded and slipped out of the ballroom with unusual urgency. Strange. Morrison never left events early, and his assistant never ran errands during speeches. In the 6 months I'd been negotiating with Morrison Group, I'd learned he was meticulous about appearances, about timing. Everything had a purpose. My father continued his monologue, but Morrison's attention had shifted. He was watching me now, not with pity or judgment, but with something that looked almost like anticipation. "The saddest part," my father was saying, "is the wasted potential. Isabella could have had it all. Instead, she chose to have nothing that matters." Morrison's lips moved slightly, as if counting down. His assistant reappeared at the ballroom entrance, carrying a leather portfolio. She didn't return to their table but positioned herself by the main doors, waiting. I remembered our last meeting 6 months ago. Morrison had asked unusual questions, not just about my company's technology, but about my relationship with my father, about Edwards Industries, about family dynamics. I'd thought he was making small talk. Now, watching him check his watch with deliberate precision, I wondered if there'd been more to it. "Some people," my father said, his voice carrying a note of false sorrow, "are simply incapable of understanding what really matters in life." Morrison stood up. The movement was subtle, but in a room hanging on my father's every word, it drew attention. He didn't head for the exit, though. He stood there, at his table, waiting for something. Or someone. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Don't leave yet. Trust me. W.M." William Morrison, the chairman of my father's board, was texting me during my public humiliation. My fingers trembled slightly as I deleted the message, but not from embarrassment. Something was happening here, something beyond my father's cruel theater. 6 months ago, Morrison had approached me at a tech conference. Not about investing in my company, that came later, but with questions about Edwards Industries' 5-year plan, about succession, about whether I'd ever considered a role in my father's company. Never, I'd told him flatly. My father would never allow it. What if he had no choice? Morrison had asked. I'd laughed it off then, thinking it was hypothetical. But Morrison didn't deal in hypotheticals. He dealt in leveraged buyouts, hostile takeovers, and strategic acquisitions that crushed competitors before they knew they were in a fight. I'm announcing tonight, my father's voice cut through my memories, that Marcus will be taking over as CEO of Edwards Industries when I step down next month. Applause scattered through the room, lukewarm and obligatory. Several board members exchanged glances. Morrison remained standing, his presence now impossible to ignore. As for Isabella, my father continued, perhaps she could work under her brother, learn what real leadership looks like. Maybe Marcus can teach her about priorities. The insult was so blatant, so calculated, that even some of his supporters shifted uncomfortably. Working under Marcus? The brother who'd failed the bar exam twice and only had a job because of nepotism? Morrison's assistant had moved closer, the leather portfolio clutched against her chest. Whatever was in there was important enough to retrieve during the biggest social event of the year. Stay strong, another text appeared. The truth has a way of surfacing. The truth about what? Marcus has proven himself, my father declared, gesturing grandly toward my brother. He understands that a real man, a real leader, puts family first. That's why I'm confident leaving my legacy in his hands. Marcus stood, basking in manufactured glory. Thank you, Father. I won't let you down. He turned to the crowd. Edwards Industries will continue to thrive under traditional values and proven leadership. Traditional values, code for keeping women in their place. A real woman would have prioritized family, my father said, his eyes finding mine again. Instead, Isabella plays with computers while her biological clock ticks away. What kind of example is that? Someone at a nearby table whispered, "This is brutal." Another person held up their phone, definitely recording. Perhaps working under your brother will teach you humility, my father continued. Marcus can show you how to balance priorities, how to be a complete person, not just a walking spreadsheet. Marcus laughed, actually laughed. I'd be happy to mentor you, Isabella. Maybe start you in our internship program? The room collectively held its breath. The insult was so egregious, so deliberately crafted to humiliate, that even my father's allies looked uncomfortable. A CEO with a company worth millions, reduced to an intern position under her incompetent brother? We could even arrange flexible hours, Marcus added, his voice dripping condescension. For when you finally decide to start a family, if it's not too late. That's when I noticed something interesting. 3 board members, Davidson, Chen, and Williams, weren't applauding. They were watching Morrison, who remained standing like a sentinel, his expression carved from stone. So let's raise our glasses, my father lifted his champagne, to Marcus Edwards, the future of Edwards Industries, and to Isabella, who might finally learn what matters. 200 glasses rose in awkward obligation. Mine stayed on the table. I stood slowly, deliberately, my movements controlled despite the tsunami of humiliation crashing over me. The room fell silent, waiting for my response. Tears, perhaps, or angry words that would justify my father's narrative. Instead, I smoothed my dress and looked directly at my father. Thank you for making your position clear, Father. My voice carried across the ballroom, steady and professional. Not a tremor, not a crack. 15 years in boardrooms had taught me that dignity in defeat was still dignity. I wish you all the best with your decision. I folded my napkin with precise movements, placed it beside my untouched champagne, and pushed in my chair. The click of my heels on marble was the only sound as I walked toward the exit. No rushed steps, no running away. Each stride measured, shoulders back, head high. I'd learned long ago that how you leave a room matters as much as how you enter it. Isabella, sit down, my father commanded. We're not finished. I paused at his table, meeting his gaze one final time. Yes, we are. The simplicity of it, the finality, seemed to shock him more than any angry outburst could have. His mouth opened, then closed, no words coming. As I reached the ballroom doors, movement caught my eye. William Morrison was following me. Not discreetly, not trying to hide it. He walked with purpose, his assistant falling into step behind him with that leather portfolio. The last thing I heard before the doors closed behind me was the eruption of whispers, 200 conversations starting at once. My father's voice rose above them, trying to regain control, but the moment was broken. Morrison caught up to me in the marble lobby. "Ms. Edwards," he said formally, loudly enough for others to hear. "We need to discuss our announcement." Our announcement? This was the hardest moment of my life, walking away from my own father's public humiliation. But sometimes the most powerful response is dignified silence. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic situation, even when every part of you wanted to fight back? Let me know in the comments. And remember, if you're finding value in this story, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. Because what happened next completely changed everything. Morrison's voice boomed across the lobby, deliberately pitched to carry back into the ballroom. "Robert, we need to discuss something before you finalize any succession plans." My father appeared in the doorway, his face flushed with anger and confusion. Behind him, guests crowded to see what was happening. Marcus pushed through, his earlier smugness replaced with uncertainty. "William, this is a private family matter." "No," Morrison interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "When it affects Edwards Industries, it becomes board business." He turned to me. "Ms. Edwards, would you mind returning? This concerns you directly." I hesitated. Every instinct screamed to keep walking, to maintain my dignified exit. But Morrison's eyes held something I'd seen in successful negotiations, the look of someone holding a winning hand. "Please," he added louder. "Your announcement can't wait until Monday." My announcement? I followed him back into the ballroom, the crowd parting like the Red Sea. Whispers followed our path. What announcement? Did you see Morrison's face? Something's happening. Morrison walked straight to the podium, gently but firmly moving my father aside. "Ladies and gentlemen, forgive the interruption, but there's been a significant development that affects everyone in this room." He gestured to his assistant, who handed him the leather portfolio. "This young woman," he indicated me, "just sold her company yesterday. The deal closed at 4 p.m. Eastern." The room buzzed with confusion. My father's face darkened. "William, this is hardly—" "For $50 million, Morrison continued, his voice cutting through the noise. "To be exact." The buzzing stopped. Dead silence. Marcus's champagne glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the marble floor. "To Morrison Group," he added, pulling out the signed contracts, "making her our youngest acquisition CEO and strategic partner." My father's face went from red to white in seconds. Morrison's assistant connected a tablet to the ballroom's presentation system. Suddenly, the massive screens that had displayed my father's corporate achievements now showed my signed acquisition agreement. "Isabella's company has developed revolutionary AI technology," Morrison announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd built a $3 billion empire. "Our analysts project it will transform supply chain management across every industry we touch." The room erupted. Phones appeared. People Googling frantically. The TechCrunch article was already live. Morrison Group acquires Edwards AI Solutions for 50 Alamas. Founder Isabella Edwards to lead innovation division. "This is ridiculous," my father sputtered. "Her little startup." "Little?" Morrison's eyebrow arched. "Robert, her little startup has patents that Microsoft and Google have been trying to license for 2 years. Her client list includes 7 Fortune 500 companies. Her revenue last quarter exceeded your son Marcus's entire division. Marcus stood frozen, his face cycling through disbelief, anger, and something that looked like fear. But more importantly, Morrison continued, addressing the room but watching my father, she's now a critical partner in Morrison Group's expansion strategy. We don't partner with failures, Robert. We partner with visionaries. Board member Davidson stood up. William, what does this mean for Edwards Industries? Morrison smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That depends entirely on Robert's next moves. You see, my investment in Edwards Industries, 40% of your company, Robert, comes with certain provisions, conditions that perhaps we should discuss. My father's legs seemed unsteady. He gripped the podium edge. What conditions? The kind that ensure good governance, Morrison replied smoothly. The kind that prevent nepotism from destroying shareholder value. The implications hung in the air like a blade. Everyone understood. Morrison controlled my father's company, and he was clearly on my side. Robert, Morrison said quietly, you just publicly humiliated my newest partner. We need to discuss that. Morrison pulled another document from the portfolio. There's one more thing this room should know. Per the governance agreement signed when I invested in Edwards Industries, any strategic decision affecting company leadership requires approval from major stakeholders. My father's lawyer, seated at table 3, half rose from his chair, his face pale. Furthermore, Morrison continued, the agreement specifically states that in cases of succession, Isabella Edwards must be offered a strategic advisor role with full veto power over major decisions. That's impossible, my father stammered. I never agreed. Page 47, section 12, subsection C. Morrison's assistant pulled up the original investment contract on the screen, highlighting the relevant passage. You signed it yourself, Robert, 3 years ago. I hadn't known. This blindsided me as much as anyone. Morrison had been playing a longer game than I'd imagined. Isabella must approve all strategic decisions going forward, Morrison announced. She's now your strategic advisor, Robert. Unless, of course, you prefer I withdraw my 40% stake. The threat was clear. Without Morrison's investment, Edwards Industries would collapse. The debt ratios were too high, the expansion too aggressive. Everyone in the room who understood finance knew it. This is corporate blackmail, Marcus burst out. No, Morrison replied calmly. This is corporate governance. Your father agreed to these terms when he desperately needed capital for the Singapore expansion. He turned back to my father. You built in this provision yourself, Robert, insisting family members get priority for advisory roles. You just never imagined it would be Isabella instead of Marcus, did you? Chen and Williams, 2 other board members, stood. We support Morrison's interpretation, Chen announced. The contract is clear. My father looked around the room, searching for allies, finding none. Even his closest supporters were reassessing, recalculating, realigning. Your daughter is now essential to your company's survival, Morrison stated simply. All eyes turned to me. The woman my father had just called a disappointment now held his company's future in her hands. The irony was so perfect, so complete that someone actually laughed nervously. I stepped forward, my voice clear and steady. I'll accept the advisor role. Relief flickered across my father's face, but I wasn't finished. But with clear conditions. I pulled out my phone, opening a document I'd drafted months ago, hoping I'd never need it. Professional meetings only, with documented minutes. All interactions related to Edwards Industries will follow corporate governance standards. Isabella, my father started. Ms. Edwards, I corrected. In professional settings, we'll maintain professional boundaries. The room absorbed this. The daughter was teaching the father about boundaries, publicly, with witnesses. Marcus will report to me on all strategic initiatives, I continued. His division's performance will be reviewed quarterly, with specific KPIs that must be met to maintain his position. Marcus's face flushed deep red. You can't. I can and I will, I replied evenly. The board has made that clear. Your division has underperformed for 3 years. That ends now. Furthermore, I addressed the room, there will be no personal discussions during business hours, no comments about my marital status, my choice to have or not have children, or any other aspect of my personal life. These are the professional boundaries required for a functioning advisory relationship. Morrison nodded approvingly. Other board members murmured agreement. I'll help the company, I said, looking directly at my father. Not your ego, not your legacy. The company and its shareholders. Those are my terms. The ballroom waited. My father stood at the podium he'd commanded minutes ago, now diminished, his authority evaporated. The power dynamics hadn't just shifted, they'd completely inverted. Do you accept these terms, Mr. Edwards? My father stood frozen at the podium, his face cycling through emotions, rage, disbelief, humiliation, and finally, resignation. 200 people waited for his response, phones ready to capture whatever came next. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat, tried again. I accept your terms. The words came out strangled, forced, but they came out. In front of everyone who mattered in his world, Robert Edwards had to accept conditions from the daughter he'd just publicly humiliated. Excellent, I replied, maintaining my professional tone. My assistant will send over the formal agreement Monday morning. We'll schedule our first strategic review for next Friday, 2 p.m. Yes, he managed. Then, as if the words were pulled from him, Strategic Advisor Edwards. The title on his lips, my title, my name, my position of power over him, resonated through the ballroom. Cameras captured it all. The business blogs would have a field day. Marcus slumped in his chair, his grand moment of triumph evaporated. He'd gone from heir apparent to subordinate in less than 10 minutes. When our eyes met, he looked away quickly, the reality of reporting to me clearly sinking in. Mr. Morrison, I addressed the chairman formally. Thank you for clarifying the governance structure. I look forward to our partnership. Morrison smiled, the first genuine warmth he'd shown all evening. The pleasure is mine, Ms. Edwards. Morrison Group is fortunate to have you. My mother approached tentatively, tears in her eyes. I embraced her briefly, professionally, mindful of the cameras still rolling. Now, I announced to the room, I believe this was meant to be a retirement celebration. Please continue enjoying your evening. I have a company to run. With that, I walked out. This time, no one called me back. This time, my father watched in silence as his disappointment of a daughter left him standing there, diminished and defeated. By the time I reached my car, my phone was exploding with notifications. The video clips were already viral. CEO Daughter Destroys Sexist Father at His Own Party had 50,000 views in 10 minutes. The comments section was brutal, for him. 3 CEOs who'd been at the dinner texted immediately with partnership proposals. Jennifer Chen, the woman my father had compared me to favorably, sent a single line. That was magnificent. Lunch Monday? My CFO called, laughing and crying simultaneously. Isabella, do you realize what just happened? We're trending worldwide. Microsoft's M&A team just called. They want to discuss strategic partnerships. The business press moved fast. Forbes had already posted, Edwards AI Solutions founder becomes strategic advisor to father's company after public showdown. The Wall Street Journal was more direct. Family drama reveals $50 Morrison acquisition. Daughter now controls father's strategic decisions. But the real vindication came from my employees. Our Slack exploded with celebration. They'd watched their CEO be diminished and had seen her rise above it. The pride in their messages, the fierce loyalty, meant more than any acquisition ever could. Marcus texted within an hour. We need to talk. Submit a meeting request through proper channels, I replied. 3 board members called personally to congratulate me and assure me of their support. We've been concerned about Robert's leadership style for years, Davidson admitted. Your appointment as strategic advisor is exactly what Edwards Industries needs. My father sent nothing. No call, no text, no email. His silence spoke volumes. By midnight, I'd received 7 speaking invitations for women's leadership conferences, 4 podcast interview requests, and a book deal inquiry. The woman who'd been called a failure at 7 p.m. was the most talked about executive in tech by midnight. The power shift was complete and irreversible. The family aftermath was swift and revealing. My mother called the next morning, her voice stronger than I'd heard in years. Isabella, I'm so proud of you. Your father hasn't left his study since last night, but I don't care. For the first time in 40 years, I feel like I can breathe. She was staying with her sister for a few days. To let him process, she said. But we both knew it was more than that. The power dynamics in their marriage had shifted too. Marcus sent a formal email Sunday night. Isabella, I apologize for my behavior and comments at the dinner. I've been jealous of your success and let Dad's favoritism go to my head. I'm ready to work professionally with you to improve my division's performance. I responded professionally, accepting his apology and outlining expectations for our first review. No warmth, no family pleasantries, just business. My extended family's group chat, usually full of baby photos and holiday planning, exploded with messages of support. Cousins I hadn't heard from in years reached out. We always knew you were the successful one, they said, conveniently forgetting years of asking when I'd settle down. The most interesting response came from my father's email, sent at 3 a.m. Monday morning. Isabella, I apologize for my inappropriate comments at the retirement dinner. I look forward to working with you in your capacity as strategic advisor. Robert Edwards, CEO. Formal. Cold. Signed with his title like I was a stranger. No dad, no love, no acknowledgement of our relationship beyond corporate roles. It was exactly what I'd asked for, professional boundaries. But seeing it in writing still stung slightly. We can discuss it at the quarterly meeting, I replied, maintaining the same formal tone. The father-daughter relationship we'd had, dysfunctional as it was, had ended in that ballroom. What emerged was something new, professional, boundaried, and entirely on my terms. The business impact exceeded every projection. Edwards Industries' stock price jumped 15% Monday morning as investors celebrated improved governance and strategic oversight. The press release Morrison crafted was masterful. Edwards Industries strengthens leadership with appointment of Isabella Edwards as strategic advisor. My acquisition made the cover of TechCrunch, Fast Company, and Business Insider. The $50 million deal that changed everything. How Isabella Edwards went from family disappointment to power player in one night. 5 venture capital firms reached out with investment offers for my next venture. Anyone who can handle that level of public pressure while maintaining dignity is someone we want to back, one prominent VC wrote. The speaking circuit exploded. Ted wanted me to talk about professional boundaries with family. Harvard Business School requested a case study. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman deemed a failure for prioritizing career was now being asked to teach career strategy at the world's top institutions. My employees' pride transformed into performance. Productivity surged 20% in the weeks following the dinner. Our newest client specifically cited Isabella's leadership under pressure as a deciding factor in choosing us over competitors. Even Marcus's division showed improvement once he started actually working instead of coasting on nepotism. His first report to me was thorough, humble, and showed genuine effort to address long-standing issues. Morrison called personally to check in. You handled that with more grace than I would have, he admitted. Your father's learning a valuable lesson about underestimating people. The Forbes 40 Under 40 list came out a month later. I was number 12, with a feature quote, "Success isn't about proving others wrong, it's about proving yourself right." Professional boundaries aren't walls, they're bridges to healthier relationships. My value was never determined by my marital status. The market had spoken, and it valued me at exactly $50 million and rising. 6 months later, Edwards Industries reported its strongest quarter in 5 years. The strategic changes I'd implemented, digital transformation, AI integration, and yes, Marcus's restructured division, had paid off magnificently. My father and I had developed a functional working relationship. Our monthly strategic reviews were efficient, professional, and surprisingly productive once ego left the equation. He'd learned to value my input, even if he couldn't bring himself to acknowledge it personally. The board is impressed with the turnaround, he said at our last meeting, maintaining eye contact with his laptop screen rather than me. Your recommendations have been beneficial. That was the closest he'd come to a compliment. I accepted it as progress. Marcus had transformed into a competent executive. Without our father's favoritism as a crutch, he'd been forced to develop actual skills. His division was finally profitable, and he'd stopped mentioning my marital status entirely. My mother had started her own journey, joining nonprofit boards and traveling with friends. I spent 40 years living for your father's approval, she told me over lunch. Watching you set boundaries gave me permission to set my own. The relationship with my father would never be warm. There would be no heartfelt reconciliation, no tearful apologies, no hallmark moment. But there was respect, grudging, hard-won, and professional. I'd been tracking something interesting. My father had been quietly following my success. It had noticed him accessing every article about my company, watching my conference keynotes on YouTube, even Googling my name daily. He couldn't bring himself to express pride directly, but he was watching. That had to count for something. Respect isn't inherited, I told a conference audience recently. It's earned. And sometimes, the people who should respect you most are the last to learn that lesson. The boundaries I'd set hadn't destroyed our relationship. They'd saved it. Success, I've learned, isn't about proving others wrong. It's about staying true to your values when everyone insists you compromise them. My father wanted me to shrink myself to fit his definition of success. Instead, I built my own definition and let the results speak for themselves. Family can love you and still not understand you. That's a painful truth I've had to accept. My father loves me in his limited way, but he may never understand why I chose the path I did. And that's okay. His understanding isn't required for my success. Professional boundaries saved our relationship. By removing the personal from our professional interactions, we found a way to coexist that didn't require me to sacrifice my dignity or him to change his fundamental beliefs. It's not perfect, but it's peaceful. I'm 39 now, still unmarried, still without children, and I've never been happier or more fulfilled. My company continues to grow. My employees respect me. My peers value my opinion. My worth was never negotiable. I just had to stop letting others bid on it. The most powerful moment of that night wasn't Morrison's revelation or the public vindication. It was the moment I stood up and walked away with dignity intact. That's when I claimed my power, not when others recognized it, but when I refused to let anyone take it from me. Your worth isn't determined by your relationship status, your reproductive choices, or your family's approval. It's determined by your integrity, your accomplishments, and your impact on the world. Don't let anyone, not even family, convince you otherwise. Set your boundaries. Hold them firmly. The people who truly matter will learn to respect them. And those who don't? Well, their opinions shouldn't matter to your success. I'm still Isabella Edwards, still building my empire, still unmarried at 39. And that's exactly who I'm meant to be. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever struggled with family who don't understand or respect your choices, remember, you have the right to set boundaries, even with those you love. Your value isn't determined by others' expectations. What boundaries have you had to set with family? Share your story in the comments below. You might help someone else find their courage. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe. And remember, success is personal. Define it for yourself. Until next time, stay strong and stay true to yourself.